Well, good morning. The times I've been able to study with you this last few weeks, we've been talking about preparation. And we started my mini-series, if you will, with talking about how God has prepared for us a place to spend eternity with Him. And we pointed out all the work that was involved in doing so, right? And so with the effort He put in, we've spent the last few weeks talking about the effort we need to put in. And we made the point a few weeks ago that we need to, when we are making preparation, we should be making preparation in Christ. And one may say that seems very mundane and simple. But I can hear myself echo. But I think we need to keep it simple. And we talked about preparing in Christ, and that lays the foundation. And we could sing the old children's song, about the wise man building his house on the rock versus the wise man building his house on the sand. But we teach that from a young age, the foundational piece of preparing in Christ. From that, we built on preparing our heart on the proper foundation, preparing our heart in Christ. Because from the heart, everything else flows, wouldn't you say? And so if our heart is not built on the right foundation, then our actions will not be approved by God. We're going to get into a little meatier topic this morning in the context of the lesson. But I wanted to point out the buildup that we had, if your memory serves you well, over the last few weeks of what we've been trying to establish and talk about. And why is that important? Because from the heart, actions are taken. And what can a group of 104 people do in a small community of Lufkin, Texas, to make a difference? I'm going to guess that each of us has at least 2 friends. Maybe you're blessed with more, and I hope you are. Your influence then affects those 2 friends, and then I'm sure those 2 friends have 2 friends, and it expounds. So the foundation you build upon and the heart that you prepare and the actions you take then affect society. Too often times society affects us individually and affects the church. And we base our actions on what society says we should or shouldn't do. That pathway is like the foolish man who built his house on the sand. It's just going to get us nowhere. So we must shape society. We must prepare our heart to go to the place God has prepared for us. Some 49 plus times in the New Testament, Jesus talks about forgiveness. Romans chapter 1 points out a list of sins that will keep us from that place God has prepared for us. And those sins are abhorrent. And we read Romans chapter 1 and we turn our nose up in disgust and say, well, good for them. I hope they never make it. In that group of abhorrent sins are two words that cause us problems: unforgiving and unloving. When we think about the problems in society today, the stances that are being made in just the abhorrent activities that go on, the murder of innocent life, the non-respect for life, we could list a PowerPoint 10 slides long of those things that just disgust us, that make us nauseated, wouldn't you say? But in that very list that makes us nauseated and disgusting are unforgiving and unloving. And so we say to ourselves, I will never commit that abhorrent sin. I stand against it. And as sure as we say that and we proclaim that, in our own heart, there is the sin of unforgiveness and unwillingness to love. Jesus has a lot to say about this topic. Let's start this morning by looking at Luke chapter 15 with me. Luke chapter 15. You know, we often go, and we won't read this entirety of this parable, but we often go to the parable of the prodigal son. And we should, when we talk about God's faithfulness and God's forgiveness of his children, to point out how the father received the son back after a riotous and wild life, the exploitation of the inheritance that was given to him. The son comes back to the father welcomes him with open arms, and we make the point that's how God welcomes back the sinner. I want to look at it from a different perspective this morning. If you look at chapter 15 and verse 1, then all the tax collectors and the sinners drew near to him, and the Pharisees and scribes complained, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." It was disgusting to the religious elite of the day that Jesus would accompany himself with those they felt were below them. This man eats and dines with sinners. He keeps company with people who disgust us. And so he goes into the prodigal son in verse 11. But I want to point your attention to verse 28. We understand the story. We understand he came back. We understand the other brother calls attention to what's going on, and it says he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. And he answered and said to his father, "I have been with you and served you for so many years. I have never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me even a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as a son of yours came back, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, and you kill the fatted calf for him." And the father says, "Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. But it was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and alive and again, and he was lost and is found." I believe a big point of the parable that Jesus is talking about in the parable of the prodigal son, when the religious elite of the day were pointing out how the company he kept and complaining about that, the parable was to hit them square between the eyes. That's what I'm supposed to do. And when sinners come back, we have to rejoice. That is called forgiveness. preparing in Christ and preparing our heart, we take parables like this and we take it to heart, that we may never stand in the seat of the Pharisees and complain when forgiveness is given. This preparation we make requires us to be proactive in knowing what God says about forgiveness and knowing about the example that Jesus set for us in this capacity, and then let that shape our hearts and not the hearts of society. Matthew chapter 18 does not talk about the prodigal son, but it does give another parable. If you'd like to turn over there with me for a second. Matthew 18 starts with folks coming to Jesus at the first part of the chapter and asking him, Jesus, who will be greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus makes the point in the first part of Matthew chapter 18 about who's going to be greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And he likens it to a little child. And what I think the point he's making is, unless you have the humility of a young, innocent person, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. And in verse 6, he says, whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. See, after he talks about the humility we should have to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, he goes directly into how we need to guard against offending one another. And one of the biggest offenses we can have for one another is the lack of forgiveness. And the point he makes in the next two parables is receive people back the way I receive them back. Have the attitude that I have. Exemplify my example in the receipt of that one who was lost but is found. And we're familiar with the parable of the lost sheep in verse 10, how there was 99 and one left, and the shepherd leaves to go find the one. You know, we had an interesting experience a couple of weeks ago that kind of exemplified this parable. One morning during the week, Easton comes back from his chores, and hey, there's a cow on the road. First thing I'm thinking is, it's one of my cows. Thankfully, it was not. My cows were in, but it was somebody's cow. So he and I, we gather the cow up, we put it on our place, and then we start putting the word out. Tag number, brand, description, putting the word out to people we knew around the area, on Facebook, just trying to alert people somebody has a missing cow. Well, on the other side of that equation was a person who had lost the cow, and they were doing the same thing, alerting their friends, trying to figure out where the cow went. It was special to them. The effort was being made to find the lost cow. And about a week and a half after that occurrence, they come driving up on their Ranger, and the expression of thanksgiving once they had found their lost possession was of great happiness and rejoicing. There was an emotional tie to that animal, and I won't go into the story, but it was more than just a cow. It had some familial ties, and they had nearly lost all hope. But the excitement and the joy and the appreciation for finding their lost possession was overwhelming. And wouldn't we all be that way? I'm sure we've experienced something in the same manner as this couple experienced, where we have searched and longed, and we finally eventually restore. and there's unimaginable thanksgiving. And the point Jesus makes with the parable of the lost sheep is, folks, if you want to follow me, if you want to be my disciple, if you want to make it to the place I have prepared for you, then everyone is important. Especially the one that has returned. Especially the one that you found. May we not be built up like the other brother. And let me say this morning, if we are one of those people who have just been true to the Word our entire life, then be that example. Be true to the Word. Because folks are out there that need help. Folks are out there that need help. This is synonymous with Paul's message to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians chapter 2. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, if you'd like to turn over there with me. Jesus' message of receiving the sinner back is the same message Paul gave in 2 Corinthians chapter 2. To set the context of the chapter, there were a couple of folks who were offensive at the church of Corinth. One we recognize as the individual in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 who Paul instructed to withdraw from because of their life. Another individual was someone who had troubled Paul, caused problems for Paul, stood against Paul. Not sure exactly which sinner 2 Corinthians chapter 2 references, but whichever person it was, this person had repented and wanted to be counted among the fold again. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, in verse 5, he says, if anyone has caused grief, he has not grieved me, but all of you to some extent, not to be too severe. This punishment, which was inflicted by the majority, is sufficient for such a man, so that, on the contrary, you ought rather to forgive and comfort him, lest perhaps such a one be swallowed up with too much sorrow. Skipping down to verse 10, now whom you forgive anything, I also forgive. For if indeed I have forgiven anything, I have forgiven the one for your sakes in the presence of Christ, lest Satan should take advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. The message Paul is giving here in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 to the church there is this individual is trying to join back to you. He's become repentant. Your job is not to punish. Your job is not to cause harm to this individual such that this individual is overwhelmed with so much sorrow and grief that he falls back into sin. And oh, by the way, it is good for you to stop punishing because Satan will grab hold of your heart. Lest Satan should take advantage of us. In this moment of apparent strength that society builds us up in, where we think there has to be a punishment that continues for the repentant person, the effort to push them away and not associate with them once the wrong has been righted, then creates in us a heart that is unforgiving, that is mentioned in Romans chapter 1, that is a fulfillment of 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 11, where Satan takes advantage of our heart. The warning is clear. Not only is the example made, but the warning is clear. An unforgiving heart is Satan working within us. But if we prepare our heart in Christ, the foundation that is laid, then the example that's extended lives out through our actions. Matthew chapter 18 also points out the parable of the unforgiving servant. And I would encourage you to read these parables when you have time. But Jesus furthers the point in, oftentimes we come to the throne of God and we ask for forgiveness. And we hope and pray God extends it to us. But on the other side of the podium, if you will, we stand strong against providing forgiveness for others. Jesus' point of view in forgiveness: do not seek revenge, seek reconciliation. For revenge opens a door. An unforgiving heart opens a door for Satan to take root and take hold. There's a lot that we can talk about with this topic. It's a really deep, deep topic. And we can't cover it all in one lesson. But my effort this morning was to, I guess, remind us Jesus forgives. If we're going to have a heart like Jesus, we need to forgive. The tentacles expanding from that are vast. But the main message is clear. When I prepare my heart, I prepare my heart to forgive. I prepare my heart to forgive myself. I prepare my heart to forgive others. And there's a million what ifs. You know, in the statistics, I think there is the if-then scenario, right? If this, then this happens. Jesus makes it clear. To enter the place I have prepared for you, we cannot be unforgiving. We must exemplify love. We must exemplify the teaching that He has provided. Rejoice, comfort, and love. Peter asked, how many times should I forgive my brother? We have the same attitude, don't we? We like to look for that finite answer. If this, then this. Well, that's not the if-then scenario. And the finite determination is not there. Jesus says 70 times 7. But look, forgiveness is not just for the forgiven. Lest we're caught up in Satan, 2 Corinthians chapter 2 says, we show love and grace. It's for our well-being. Can we all be more like Jesus? When we are the repentant person, the call is for us to be more like Jesus. When we have to be the forgiving person, the call is be more like Jesus. For that is a foundation that he has laid. If you are here this morning, that call is available. That promise of forgiveness is available. The place he has prepared for you is available to all. I hope this has been helpful this morning. I understand this is a deep, deep topic. But on the flip side, it's something that's so necessary for each one of us to consider and to apply. Ephesians 4:32 and Colossians 3:13 says, "May we be forgiving of one another, just as Christ forgave you." If we can help you in any way, please come as we stand as we sing.